With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam President. And I appreciate the comments from my colleague from Indiana that I got to hear a moment ago. I think he's absolutely right. We have deeper and more important problems that we need to address, along with the important decision we make over the next 24 hours on the debt limit. It's necessary to extend the debt limit, but it's not sufficient. We also have to deal with these underlying fiscal problems. And to my colleague from Indiana, I think you stated that well. I rise today, Madam President, to talk about the debt limit proposal and to talk about how we can provide a pathway forward on a bipartisan basis, again, not just to solve this immediate problem that confronts us, but also to deal with these deeper and very serious problems we have with our fiscal deficits and a weak economy. Maybe good to start by asking why we're here. We're here because we have a law that says that the U.S. government can only borrow so much. And the law says that the U.S. government can only borrow up to $14.3 trillion. It's a lot of money. $14.3 trillion is almost the size of our entire economy now. It's probably 95% of our economy. This is unprecedented, of course. We've never had debts of this level before. Many economists look at this and believe that it's already having a very negative impact on our economy to have this huge debt out there because it affects the private sector. But we have come to this $14.3 trillion limit, and now in order for government to continue to provide everyday government services, benefits to our troops, veterans, Social Security, and so on, the limit needs to be raised. We now borrow at the federal government level more than 40 cents of every dollar that's spent. So it seems to me only common sense that when you've maxed out on your credit card, which is what the federal government has done, and when you have this deep underlying problem of these huge deficits, $1.5 trillion this year, record level also, and mounting debt, that you should deal with the underlying problem before you extend the credit card limit. And so that's why we're here. And I think it's an appropriate debate. I wish it could have been resolved sooner. I think that it can be resolved over the next day or so. But I think it's an important discussion that we have to have. The President has made it clear that he'd like the debt limit increased, and he would like it increased high enough to last through the 2012 election. Interesting, because Election Day is not part of the economic calendar. It's not the end of a fiscal year. It's not the end of a calendar year. It's the political calendar. And it's unfortunate that during this time of such budgetary uncertainty, we seem focused on political deadlines. Meeting this request the President has made that it be extended until beyond the election would be the largest debt increase that's ever been approved by the United States Congress. It would be over $2 trillion. So, again, I think it's appropriate we have this discussion before we agree to the largest debt limit increase in the history of our country. We've never raised the debt limit that much at one time before. The President also says that we need to do this because the markets want certainty that a long-term debt limit increase will happen. I think there is something to that in the sense of market certainty. If there could be a longer debt limit increase, I suppose it would add to market certainty. But markets don't just want a solution to this debt limit issue. In fact, I would argue that what they want even more is a solution to the soaring debt itself. And this is not based on conjecture. It's based on looking at what those who are analyzing our economy say. Fitch, Moody's, Standard & Poor's. You've heard about these credit agencies. A lot of people are talking about them. They're the ones threatening to downgrade our debt. What they say is, yes, we should extend the debt limit, but they say that's just the first step. We have to also deal with the underlying fiscal problems in our country, or the downgrade will occur. They want a serious commitment to reining in the spending spree that's buried us in debt in the first place. So it has to be dealt with. A friend of mine sent me an email tonight, Keith Hennessy, which was kind of interesting way to put it for people who follow the financial markets. He said, we face both a liquidity crisis right now, which is the federal government can't borrow to meet its needs, but we also face a solvency crisis, which is the federal government deficits and the accumulation of those deficits into the debt is at historic levels and already harming the economy and threatening to harm the economy in very significant ways. So we need to deal with both. One way to show this commitment to the solvency problem, to the debt problem, is to be sure that we guarantee $1 in spending cuts for every dollar we raise the debt limit. This is a formula that was laid out several months ago by Speaker Boehner. And I think it's been widely agreed to. You'll see it in the proposal that Majority Leader Reid has proposed. As we'll talk about in a minute, unfortunately, some of the budget savings that he thought were there based on the Congressional Budget Office analysis are not real cuts. But that was the formula that he used. The President has also talked about this formula, and I think it's widely agreed that we need to be sure we're only extending the debt limit to the extent that we are reducing spending. So if it's going to be over $2 trillion of debt limit extension, we need to find $2 trillion in spending reductions over time. It's interesting, as I've analyzed how this formula would work over time, that it actually makes sense for our economy, because if we raise the debt limit $1 but also cut $1 in spending, it not only helps the short term, but over a 10-year period, as I look at this, what the Congressional Budget Office tells us in terms of what the debt is likely to be, just about at the 10th year, we would actually balance the federal budget. Not get rid of the debt. The debt will continue to grow all during that time period, unfortunately. But there would actually be, at the end of that process, an annual balanced budget by applying that formula. I don't think that necessarily was the intent when the formula was derived, but it is interesting that it's a formula that makes sense to get us at least over 10 years to the point where we're not spending more than we're taking in. Given that the President, Majority Leader, would like to see a debt increase of over $2 trillion, and Republicans and even many Democrats, again, want to be sure that there is an equal-sized spending cut, it seems to me there's an obvious way forward. We can raise the debt limit for this extended period of time, but we have to require equal spending cuts, and they have to be real. If they aren't meaningful and credible spending cuts, then we'll have the same negative economic consequence we've been talking about tonight. The credit agencies will downgrade our debt. We will have higher interest rates, which affect every American family. Student loans, credit card loans, certainly our mortgages. It affects small businesses who are trying to hire people to be able to get credit. If you have a car loan, it's going to affect you. It affects the entire economy. So we've got to deal with this issue in a real way, in a way that is credible and meaningful. Unfortunately, the proposal that Majority Leader Reid has put forward, although, again, it was intended to meet this formula we talked about of $1 spending cuts for every dollar of increase, has some spending cuts that do not meet that standard of being credible and meaningful. The biggest one is about $1 trillion in what's called the Global War on Terrorism spending reduction. A little background on this. When you're writing a budget baseline, the Congressional Budget Office says you have to assume all the spending that's happening now, so-called discretionary spending, will continue into the future. So for the next years, they assume for the next 10 years that we will spend about $150 billion a year on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Nobody believes or hopes that will happen. It has not been requested by the President. No one intends to spend that money. In fact, the President's own budget assumes that instead of the $1.7 trillion that would be over the next decade, that instead we will spend about $600 billion. That's what the President's budget says. That's what people assume. This means that Senator Reid's proposal to take credit for cutting an additional $1.1 trillion that's not going to be spent anyway is not going to be viewed as a credible proposal. Why? Because it's money that's not planning to be spent. It's a little like a family saying, let's assume we're going to take a vacation we're never going to take, and it's going to cost $10,000, and then saying, we saved $10,000 on our budget. I wish it weren't so. I wish the $1.1 trillion was credible spending reductions we could rely on. But the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, many other observers have looked at this and said, frankly, it's not a meaningful reduction in spending. So there are some meaningful reductions in spending in the proposal of the majority leader, but this particular one, unfortunately, is a big part of what he has proposed. Out of his $2.7 trillion, about $1.1 is his proposal on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. You might hear referred to on the floor here as the OCO spending, Overseas Contingency Operations. So I think that's one thing we should do as a Congress, is be sure these cuts are meaningful and credible, and we can do that. Second, let's expand this initial round of spending cuts. Right now, when you take out the war spending we just talked about that's not going to actually materialize, the savings won't materialize, and when you look at the Congressional Budget Office score of the majority leader's proposal, the cuts are just under $1 trillion. Still a substantial and I think a credible proposal of just under $1 trillion. But that's all that's guaranteed. However, Washington is scheduled to spend about $46 trillion over that same period, the next decade. Think about that, $46 trillion. Increased spending, by the way, by about 57% during that time period. So I think we can do a lot better than just cutting $1 trillion over the next 10 years. And I think we can do it in a bipartisan fashion. I say that because I've identified $2.8 trillion in spending reductions that have been agreed to by some bipartisan process. The Biden talks, the Gang of Six, the President's Fiscal Commission, some of the President's own discussions. The Vice President's group specifically came up with some spending reductions in addition to this $1 trillion. So my hope is that we can take some of these spending cuts that have been agreed to through some bipartisan process and apply them to this initial package. Finally, Majority Leader Reid and Speaker Boehner's proposals both have this deficit reduction committee. It's an approach which I think makes sense to be sure that we get at the longer range problem here, which is our unsustainable, very important but unsustainable entitlement programs, tax reform, which will help stimulate more economic growth, budget reform, which is clearly needed. I've been here 6 months. We've done nothing on a budget here, but in fact the Senate hasn't done a budget in 2 years. It sounds like we're in need of some reforms to make this place work. So this committee, I think, makes sense. The majority leader calls for the committee to reduce the budget deficit to 3% of GDP. I think it's an interesting proposal. I think we need to be sure we know how long it would take to reach that level and how long we should maintain it, because there's no time frame in his proposal. So 3% of GDP, does that mean we would wait until a certain time period, say if it's a 10-year proposal, the 9th year or the 10th year, and suddenly make those reductions? If so, the reductions would not be nearly as significant. Instead, what we should do is put a time frame in place, 5 years or 10 years, I'd prefer 5, and to say that there will be reductions starting in the first fiscal year to meet the 3% target. If you don't do that, then over that period of time, 5 years or 10 years, we will not see the kinds of reductions in spending that I think Majority Leader Reid would like to see. And I know that many of us here on this side of the aisle believe is necessary. Eventually, we've got to balance the budget, as we talked about earlier. And it needs to be something within this 3% committee that leads us to that. Also, under the Majority Leader's bill, there's no requirement to actually enact any of the Deficit Reduction Committee's reforms. I think he has a very interesting proposal in terms of having an expedited process on the floor, an up or down vote, no amendments. I think that's smart. But if the Deficit Reduction Committee deadlocks, or if the Deficit Reduction Committee fails to get the votes here on the floor of the Senate, there needs to be some sort of a mechanism, a fail-safe mechanism, or a so-called trigger for accomplishing dollar-for-dollar cuts. The House plan, I think, responsibly makes much of this debt limit increase contingent on the cuts being actually approved and signed into law in this committee. If the President and Majority Leader Reid want the entire debt limit increase now, we would need some sort of guarantee that this deficit reduction will actually take place. A common sense compromise, it seems to me, would be to add sequestration language, meaning you sequester across the board all spending, if the Deficit Reduction Committee doesn't work, deadlocks, or doesn't pass on the floor, even under these expedited procedures. And I would say that you could limit that sequestration to the size of the debt limit increase, not even the size that Speaker Boehner has, which was $1.8 trillion, or Leader Reid, I think, assumes, which is even higher than that for his debt reduction committee. But just to be sure that it meets, again, this formula of $1 spending cuts for every dollar of extension for the debt limit to the period that the President would like to see. That seems to me to be the kind of proposal that, at this late hour, could be agreed to, and certainly should be. Sequestration, by the way, is not a new concept. It's enforced nearly every budget reform law of the past 20 years in the United States Congress. It can guarantee that one way or another we will receive the deficit reduction equal to the debt limit increase, which is, again, the intent by Majority Leader Reid, Speaker Boehner, and others. Finally, I think we need to allow the Senate to vote on a balanced budget amendment. Let's have a vote. Leader Reid's talked about that. Speaker Boehner has talked about that. I think it's important to provide the representatives of the American people the opportunity to have an up or down vote on a balanced budget, or many forms of a balanced budget, because there are different iterations of a balanced budget. It seems that this path forward should be able to satisfy both sides. The President, Majority Leader, would get the larger debt limit increase they want. There would be guaranteed deficit reduction that's necessary to begin fixing the budget and to assuring financial markets that we're up to the task. So I think, Madam Chair, when you look at the various options that we've got before us, there is a way forward here. It's a way forward that says, let's ensure that we really have this upfront spending. Let's remove the global war on savings gimmick, because it doesn't work. Let's strengthen the initial savings, provide guarantees that this deficit reduction committee will actually work, and then let's have a vote on the balanced budget amendment. Madam President, finally, I've heard the President talk about the importance of having the debt limit increase because of the market uncertainty in the economy. I agree that we need to do everything we can to stimulate this economy right now. We had bad news this week.
The senator's time has expired.
Unanimous consent for 30 additional seconds.
Without objection.
However, again, getting back to our earlier discussion, if we simply extend the debt limit and don't deal with the underlying issue of our fiscal problems, what we called earlier the solvency crisis, we will have these same negative economic consequences. With low growth in this quarter and, unfortunately, high unemployment, over 9%, we need to do everything we can to encourage pro-growth economic policies here. That includes tax reform, as we talked about. It includes using the energy resources we have in this country. It includes regulatory relief. And, yes, it includes dealing with our debt and deficit. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Maryland.
Madam President, I rise to speak on the Reid amendment. Madam President, first of all, I'm sorry that we're engaged in a filibuster. We are using parliamentary procedure in a way that only delays us taking votes. We are days away from default. We are days away from our bond rating to be downgraded. If we fail to raise the debt limit, the United States of America will be irrevocably fractured. We cannot fail and we cannot falter. We must act, and we must act tonight. Now, last night, the Senate rejected the Boehner plan because it wasn't a solution. It would lead us over the cliff because it did not meet certain tests. If the Republicans force us into default or downgrade, it will be the biggest tax increase on Americans. When interest rates go sky high, it will be a tax on Americans. We know that we have to agree to additional spending cuts, but it's got to be long-term. We have to have a path forward for eliminating tax earmarks and entitlement reform that does not lead to a stampede to shrink Social Security benefits or to raise the Medicare age. Mr. Boehner took it upon himself last week to come up with a solution. He told the President Mr. Boehner, was the guy to do it. Well, he didn't succeed. His proposal was failed leadership and failed economics because it did not meet the threat to our economy from default and downgrade. Mr. Boehner insisted that there be a vote in December to raise the debt ceiling, that the House and Senate must pass balanced constitutional amendments. Madam President, that's false. You know, in America, we can guarantee a vote, but we can't guarantee an outcome. Here are the facts. We will be downgraded if we don't take action or if action is not taken seriously. So we must have serious policy. We must have a pragmatic process to reform taxes and also the way to deal with entitlements. Those who rate our credit, like Moody, said a short-term extension would lead to downgrade in credit. Now, under the Boehner proposal, we would be downgraded immediately because of his criteria. The Republicans' refusal to say yes to the $2 trillion spending cuts that is proposed in the Reid resolution is mind-boggling. We're agreeing to $2 trillion worth of cuts. Now, as a Democrat, as a New Deal Democrat, as a Fair Deal Democrat, I have now agreed to more cuts than I would ever do under any other circumstances. I have compromised. Other Democrats of my political persuasion have compromised. Where's the compromise on the other side? We need compromise, first of all, to get a vote, and then to get it done. I am really scared that if we go into a default, interest rates will skyrocket, but the President's going to have to set priorities. Benefits will be affected. Madam President, today I have a Marine Corps pin on. Why did I wear a Marine Corps pin? First of all, because of their words, Semper Fi, always faithful. How about us? Why can't we be as good as the military we send into war? Those men and women are willing to put their life and their lives on the line to fight and defend for democracy. Why can't we be willing to put our political careers on the line to fight and defend democracy? I'm willing to make the tough choices. I've already made a tough choice to support this significant and draconian cuts in domestic spending, with very little coming out of defense when more should come. I wanted to get rid of sacred cows, like the ethanol subsidy, like the oil and gas subsidy, those sacred cows that just slurp it up and milk the public trough. But oh no, we couldn't go to revenues. We just had to go to cuts. So guess what? Democrats have compromised. We have gone 80% of the way. Why can't they come the other 20% and say yes to Reid? Reid gives us a deadline through 2013, which provides the certainty that the credit ratings look like. We make a significant down payment on reducing the debt, and we have a political process, and I'm going to put more teeth in it, a political process to get rid of tax earmarks, and that's what they are, make no mistake. They're tax earmarks for the pampered and the prosperous. I'm ready to reform that, and then taking a look at entitlement reform. Madam President, I think the Reid proposal is the path forward, but I say as we wrap up, can we put politics aside? Could we put partisan sniping aside? Could we not come together? Now, we on this side of the aisle have made 80% of a compromise. We look to the other side to give us the other 20%. But then it will be not giving the Democrats that. It will be ensuring the solvency and security of the United States of America. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Vermont.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the alternating blocks continue until 9 p.m. in the following manner. Majority controlling the time until 8:20 p.m., Republicans controlling the next 30 minutes, and the majority controlling the remaining time. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the Tea Party members in the House have achieved a remarkable feat. As the New York Times put it today, and I quote, "The scope of their victory in reshaping the debt ceiling bill to reflect the fiscal hawkishness of the most conservative House members cannot be overstated," end quote. In other words, despite Democratic control over the White House, despite Democratic control over the Senate, despite overwhelming opposition from the American people, a small minority of the members of the Republican-controlled House have successfully pushed an extreme right-wing agenda onto the American political landscape. This right-wing ideology is a set of beliefs which represent the interest of the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations. It is an ideology which ultimately wants to destroy Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, and make devastating cuts in education, Head Start, environmental protection, nutrition, infrastructure, and every other program which protects the interests of working families and the middle class. It is an ideology which believes that despite the fact that the rich are getting richer, the middle class is shrinking, and poverty is increasing, all of the burden for deficit reduction should rest on working people. Despite the fact that in the last 25 years, the top 1% have achieved 80% of all new income, what this right-wing ideology says, we have got to cut back on education. We have got to cut back on health care. We have got to cut back on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and every other program that a middle class and a working class hurting desperately in the midst of this recession depend upon. In my view, Madam President, this is an ideology which is grotesquely immoral, and it is also bad economic policy. It has failed time after time, most recently during the Bush administration, when during his 8 years in office, we lost 500,000 private sector jobs, the worst job performance record in modern American history. It is an ideology which, in poll after poll, has been rejected by the American people. For example, just recently, a few days ago, a Washington Post poll came out. 72% of the American people, and this is similar to every other poll that I have seen, says that if we're going to be effective in dealing with deficit reduction, the most preferred way is to ask those people making more than $250,000 a year to pay more in taxes. 72% of the American people. The Republicans, on the other hand, have fought time and time again to say that the wealthy and the largest corporations, some of which make billions in profit, pay nothing in taxes. They are not to be asked for 1 cent of sacrifice in deficit reduction. Just working families, just children, just the elderly, just the sick. Madam President, it seems to me that in this very late date of this debate, we face 4 options, none of which are particularly good. The first option is what some of the right-wing extremists have wanted all along. Let us default. It's not a problem. So what if millions of Social Security recipients don't get their check? So what if veterans don't get the check that they were promised? So what if sick people who are dependent on Medicare and Medicaid can't get the medical help they need? No problem. Let's default. Clearly, most of us understand that that scenario would be a disaster for this country, for our economy, and in fact for the entire global economy. Second option that we're looking at is a bill that was passed Friday. in the Republican House, the so-called Boehner bill. This bill would require massive cuts right now to a wide variety of programs, and most importantly, it would bring this congressional circus back into action immediately, because within 6 months we would have to go over this debate once again. That is an absurd proposal. And included in that proposal, because they want huge amounts of cuts 6 months from now, no question, massive cuts to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. That is what the Boehner proposal is about. Third option is the Reid bill. This bill, while by no means as destructive as the Boehner bill, is also bad news for working families because of the Republican commitment to the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations. It also would make heavy cuts on working families and not one penny of revenue coming from the rich and large corporations. Madam President, let me discuss the one remaining option that seems to me to make at least some sense. Not a great option, but the best available. And that's already been spoken about by my good friend Tom Harkin. It seems to me that the least onerous option available to us today is for the President of the United States to exercise his authority under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution to pay the debts incurred by the United States. The Constitution is very clear in saying that the debts of the United States, quote unquote, shall not be questioned. The President swears an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, and many constitutional scholars believe that the 14th Amendment gives the President the authority and responsibility to pay our debts regardless of the dysfunctionality of the U.S. Congress. I think that's just what he should do if he is left with no other way to protect the full faith and credit of the United States. I believe that former President Bill Clinton is absolutely right in saying that if he was still in the White House, that is what he would do. Clinton said, and I agree with him, quote, "I think the Constitution is clear, and I think this idea that the Congress gets to vote twice on whether to pay for expenditures it has appropriated is crazy," end of quote. Let me be clear about exactly what this means and why it is so important that the President use this amendment now at this particular moment in history. Let us remember that the debt ceiling was raised 18 times under Ronald Reagan and 7 times under George W. Bush, when the national debt increased by some $5 trillion. Madam President, if we concede to the right-wing Republicans, and if we make all of these cuts right now because they refuse to raise the debt ceiling, this sets a horrendous precedent for the future of congressional action. What this would do is mean that no matter what legislation and appropriations were passed by a future Congress, the new Congress could simply say, "We refuse to pay those bills." This would cause massive uncertainty in the financial market, drive interest rates up, and cloud the entire legislative process of the U.S. Congress. That is wrong and must not happen. Mr. President, Madam President, I understand that there are those who disagree with this option, and I respect that. But I think we have an obligation to our senior citizens and our veterans to say, yes, you are going to get the Social Security checks and the other benefits that you have been promised. We have an obligation to our children and to the sick that, yes, you are going to get the Medicare and Medicaid benefits that you have been promised. And yes, incredibly, we have an obligation to the men and women in our armed forces who are putting their lives on the line, and we have an obligation to them to make sure that they get paid. So, Madam President, if Republican recalcitrance prevents us from reaching an agreement, then the President of the United States must do what is best for our people and for the future of this country. He must use his constitutional authority under the 14th Amendment to pay our debts. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Senator Boxer.
Madam President, how much time do I have under the order?
13 and a half minutes remain on the Democratic side.
Thank you. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of SRES 246, which was submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report.
SRES 246, recognizing and commending the 2011 National Veterans Wheelchair Games to be held in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, August 1st through August 6th, 2011.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Madam President, I further ask that the resolution be agreed to, preamble be agreed to, the motions to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, and that any statements relating to this measure be printed at the appropriate place in the record.
Without objection, it's agreed to.
Thank you so much, Madam President. And I want to say that I listened very carefully to the senior senator from Maryland's remarks about where we find ourselves, and I want to associate myself with her remarks at what a dire situation we are in at this moment. We really stand here tonight on the edge of an economic calamity. Why is that? America is at the brink of being unable to pay our bills, bills that we already voted to pay way in the past. When you raise the debt ceiling, it's not about future spending, it's about meeting your obligations. How did we get to this debt? How did we get to this debt? Well, for many years we ran deficits and they added up. But I remember when Bill Clinton was president, and Madam President, I know you remember this, we balanced the budget. And we didn't have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We balanced the budget by sitting down and figuring out what was wasteful spending, what was important investments. We had economic growth, 23 million new jobs, and all the revenues that came with it. We had surpluses. And when George W. Bush became president, he said, this surplus, I got to give this back to the people, and he gave it back to the millionaires and the billionaires. And he put 2 wars on the credit card, and poof, there went the surplus. And then he had a prescription drug benefit, but he didn't pay for it, and there went the surplus. So, 2 wars on the credit card, prescription drug benefit on the credit card, and tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires on the credit card, and all of a sudden, we started to see the debt rise. Now, my Republican friends who have suddenly discovered this debt never said a word when George Bush was president, and we raised the debt ceiling 9 times. Did you see the Democrats out here on the floor threatening to hold up the whole country? Did you see the Democrats saying, we won't give George Bush an increase in the debt ceiling unless he does whatever we want? We didn't do that. We shouldn't ever do that. That's what's going on here. Republicans, led by the far extreme of their party, are holding this country hostage. And they are saying, unless they get their way, they won't relent. Now, I pray and I hope, and I'm talking to my Republican friends in these hours, that we will be able to come to some agreement. But I will say this. We are facing now a filibuster by my Republican friends. They will not allow us to vote on the Reid Amendment with just a majority vote. They're demanding a supermajority. And what I find interesting is they didn't demand a supermajority vote over in the House for the Boehner proposal. That was just done by a simple majority. Now they say we need a supermajority to vote on the Reid proposal. Harry Reid has his door wide open, Madam President. You know that as well as I. He has invited Mitch McConnell, all the Republicans, come on in. I'm here. I'm ready to negotiate. What is it that you need? So far, we know there are conversations going on among members. We don't see that leadership coming from Leader McConnell, and I hope he's rethinking this because the whole world is watching. and they see a filibuster tonight, and they understand which side is trying to resolve it. Now, how did we really get here? I explained how we got to the debt. How did we get to this moment? Well, the debt ceiling needed to be raised, and our Republicans said to our president, we're not going to give you a clean debt ceiling increase. We want to sit down and work on some cuts to the budget. And guess what? The president said, well, I don't know, but we'll do it. Come on in, we'll do it. And then the president said, you know what? Let's get a really big deal. Let's get a $4 trillion deal. Let's get out of this budgetary crisis. And the president gave and gave and gave. And what was the reward? First, Eric Cantor stalked out of the talks. Stalked out. I don't want to be part of this. He took his little blankie and went home. Then John Boehner, he's in the talks. And he walks out of the talks. Not once, but twice. And he said, well, I'm done with this. I'm going to work with the people on Capitol Hill. I'm going to go talk to the bipartisan leadership here. We said, fine, we'll try to work with you. But they want everything their way, my way or the highway. If you ever looked up what compromise means, it means everybody gives a little. A, we didn't want to attach this to the debt ceiling increase. We said, okay, we'll do it. You feel strongly about it, we'll do it. They said, okay, we don't want any new revenues. They don't want to touch millionaires and billionaires. God forbid they should pay $5 more a year to help us. We said, you know what? We think it's wrong. But if that's what you're saying, we'll just do cuts. That was not happy. Harry Reid did more cuts than the Republicans, twice as many. That still wasn't good enough for them. It's always more of what they want. Now, I raised a family, and I know sometimes it's tough. This is the American family. If you have an argument between two kids in your family, I happen to have 2 children, now I have 4 grandchildren, they argue, you got to say, let's listen to each other first. I'll give up something, you give up something. Let's meet in the middle. Oh, no. And then you think, well, wait a minute. Why do they think they deserve every single thing they want? What are they thinking? Do they run the United States Senate? No, the Democrats do. Madam President, you and I just won re-election. You are the longest-serving woman ever in this United States Senate. I'm so proud to know you. You have had some hard races in your life. I had the toughest race of my life coming back here. But I came back here. Leader Reid came back here. Patty Murray came back here. Michael Bennet came back here, and we run the Senate. President Obama is the president. He happens to be a Democrat. And the House won a huge victory, the Republicans. A huge victory. The Republicans run the House. The Democrats run the Senate. The president is a Democrat. Let's see, that's 3 branches, 2/3 run by the Democrats. The Republicans won it all. If one of my kids did that, if they were arguing with the other one, I'd say, that's not right. I'm not even asking for 2/3. As Senator Mikulski said, we've come a long way from where we want to come. Where have they come? They haven't come toward us. Now the plan that the Republicans want is to revisit this debt crisis in 3 months, 4 months, 5 months from now. Imagine roiling the markets. I used to be a stockbroker a very long time ago. And in those years, when the president got a cold, the market went down, everyone was worried. But we never had a crisis like this. Do you know we have raised the debt limit 89 times in our history? No political party, no Republican Party, no Democratic Party has ever held the debt ceiling increase hostage to their desires, hopes, and dreams. And what does the other side want? They'll be honest. Not all of them. They want cuts in Social Security, Medicare. They even had a proposal over in the House to end Medicare as we know it. We're not going there. We will not go there. And we will not be revisiting this every 3-4 months. It's a recipe for a downgrade in our bonds. It's a recipe for turmoil in the marketplace. It's a recipe for higher mortgage rates. It's a recipe for more unemployment. It's a recipe for chaos. It's a recipe for chaos. I'd be happy to.
Calls from
Would
people.
the senator please use a microphone?
Sorry, Madam President. Thank you. Sorry I didn't address the chair. Senator Boxer, I was on the phones today listening to people call in from Ohio taking calls, and I heard so many people very afraid of the Boehner legislation and what might come out of a further compromise. Senator Reid, as you said, has offered a good many cuts and you know, doing this in a way that's bipartisan. Are you hearing that in your state, that there's a real fear that they might, that the Republicans in the House certainly are insisting on Social Security and Medicare cuts and what that would mean to people in your state?
Well, absolutely. We, as you know, are the largest state in the union, 38 million people. We have more people on Social Security than any other state, Medicare, and they know what the stakes are. They're smart. And if you look at the polls, 70% of the people say tax millionaires and billionaires, they should pay their fair share, spare Social Security, Medicare, education, and the things that we need. But we are here in a man-made crisis. This is unnecessary. This has never been done before, and I think the people have to understand that. Never, ever has this been done before. We raised the debt ceiling 18 times when Ronald Reagan was president, and I happened to be in the House of Representatives. And yes, a few people here and there voted no once in a while, but no one ever thought of bringing down that vote. Because we can't have the greatest country in the world defaulting on our bonds. We can't have us defaulting on our contracts. Small businesses are calling me. I say to my friend from Ohio and my friend from Maryland and my friend from Alaska, small businesses are calling me. They're saying they can't get credit now. The banks are fearful. They're only getting overnight credit. What are we doing in this man-made crisis? We have a long history of working together at times like this. Leader Reid's office is open. The door is opened. So this is the time to work together. We have until 1 in the morning when we hope we can get an up or down vote on Leader Reid's proposal. I know there are talks going on. I've been talking to my Republican friends. They want to find a way out of this. But you know what? We have to pledge allegiance to the flag, not to Grover Norquist. We have to do what is right for the country. And I pray and I hope that we do. And I will say this, if we fail this, I hope the President will invoke the 14th Amendment. Everyone should read it. It says the debt of the United States shall not be questioned. And if we can't get together, the President will have to take that responsibility. But I hope we can and show the world that we can still work together. Thank you very much, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
This gentlelady from Alaska.
Thank you, Madam President. I follow my friend from California, and I agree wholeheartedly with her that the United States of America cannot default on its debts and obligations. And I would like to think that every 100 of us in this body would concur and agree that we must
using every tool that we have at our disposal, using all of our relationships and what we have built as members here in this body and in the House of Representatives, that we use our best efforts to ensure that we do not default as a nation, but that we go further, and we offer the people of this country a solution to the problems that have led us to the point that we are today. We have heard a great deal over the course of these past few days about the Boehner Plan and whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, and now the Reid Plan and whether it is good, bad, or indifferent. And we assumably know what the Republicans want and what the Democrats want. But, Madam President, what do the people of this country want right now? I don't know what all of the people of America want, but I can give you some ideas about what I'm hearing from the people of Alaska and what they're concerned about and what they want from the United States Senate, from the U.S. House of Representatives, and from the President of this country. What they want is they want us to fix it. Ah, that it should be so easy. Just fix it. But they expect us to do just that. They expect us to fix this problem. That's why they have entrusted us with their confidence by allowing us the privilege to come and represent them in this body to help resolve these issues. But they don't expect that I, as a Republican, am going to resolve it with just Republicans. They expect that we, as members of the Senate, will resolve this, Republicans and Democrats alike. They believe that we will achieve a compromise built on the good ideas that come from the Republicans and the good ideas that come from the Democrats. And we come together to solve the problems that affect the people in the great state of Maryland and the people in the great state of Alaska and all the places in between. So in our effort to fix us, they expect us to compromise. Compromise should not be a negative or a nasty term. It should be what we all work to achieve jointly. I would suggest that the other thing that the people are looking for is honesty. They're listening to this debate. We have received phone calls in my office all day today. We've been receiving them all week. And I think so many of us have picked up the phones ourselves to hear what people are saying when they are calling in. And they're saying, wait a minute, you guys are throwing numbers around and you know, first of all, Speaker Boehner puts out a plan and, well, it doesn't achieve the one-to-one ratio that he thought, so he pulls it back, and now we got another set. And now Senator Reid has his proposal on the floor, but people are talking about this $1 trillion that is going to go for the war effort in Afghanistan and Iraq that we know is not really real, and that these are phantom numbers. And they're saying, who are we to believe? Why are you not honest with us about the proposals that are out there? Does it cut what you expect that it will cut? If, in fact, we're going to be focused on entitlements, Social Security, if we're going to be talking about tax revenues and how we might deal with tax reform, can you not be honest with us, the American people, your constituents, the people that you represent? They want a level of honesty in this discourse, and we owe that to them. The other thing that the people are looking for is certainty. There were some of my colleagues who spoke earlier in the day, and they were speaking from their perspective of small businesses and how, as a small businessman, or a large business person for that matter, how it's imperative that in order for you to make those business judgment decisions in terms of whether or not you're going to expand, whether you're going to bring on additional employees, you need to have a level of certainty in terms of what's going to go on, what's going to happen with tax policy, what is the future of the economy going to be, what is the jobs picture like. And it's not like we all have a crystal shiny ball out there that we can predict with great precision. We don't. We don't. But what we ought not be doing is to inject greater uncertainty. And that's what is happening right now. All throughout this summer, we have kind of strung people along. We all knew that August 2nd was coming. We all knew that the revenues coming in and the outlays going out were not going to be measuring up, and we were going to be dealing with the potential for a default. We were going to be dealing with the potential for a downgrade in our credit rating. This is no surprise to anybody. That's where our crystal ball actually is pretty transparent. And yet, we're not able to pull it together. We're not able to pull it together. We managed to take a recess last week, even though we were all promised that we were going to be here working round the clock because we had important business to do. I was here with a colleague on Friday morning after the vote, looked around, realized I was perhaps the last senator left here in Washington, D.C. I got on a plane at 2:30 that afternoon to go to Alaska, for crying out loud. You know, we should have been here last weekend doing this instead of mere hours before we are up against our default deadline. And so what does this do to the certainty or the uncertainty in the economic climate, to the investment climate? I hesitate to be one that would suggest that we need to be making market decisions because we can't figure out what's going on here. But I can tell you, because I'm hearing it in the halls, people are saying, well, I don't know about you, but I'm looking at my investment fund, my retirement fund, and I'm moving things. That's the kind of confidence they have in our ability to figure it out here. We're seeing it translate in the numbers. We saw that at the end of the week with the markets. We know that tomorrow evening, when the Asian markets open, everybody in the world, this is not just the people here in Washington, D.C., but everybody in the world from the financial community is looking to see whether or not we as a Congress have figured it out, if we have fixed it. And if we don't, that continued uncertainty just continues this spiral. We can do a lot here in the United States Senate. We can do a lot in the Congress. We can pass bills and the President can sign them into law. But one of the things that we cannot really legislate is we can't tell the markets shape up. We can't tell the markets pull it back in, everything's going to be okay. They're picking up on signals, and the signals right now are a level of uncertainty that is really rattling. The other thing, Madam President, that I think the people of this country are hoping for, are asking for, is a level of civility and respect within this body, to our President, to those in the other body. We all come from different persuasions. Alaska is different than Maryland. My politics are different than your politics, Madam President, but I have great respect for you. And we can argue and we can disagree, but we don't need to poke fingers in one another's eyes to get our point across. And I think what the people have seen as we have engaged in this debate is something that does not do justice to the integrity of this institution. We need to get back to that point where we can engage in good debate and disagree heartily and make our arguments without being disrespectful of one another and the perspectives that we as individuals representing our constituencies and our states bring to the table. So the hour is late. We'll have a vote at 1 o'clock in the morning. How dignified. What body comes together at the darkest hour to cast a vote? Last evening, I had my brother and sister-in-law who were in town. They were passing through very quickly, and they were actually able to be here and watch for about an hour and a half while we were engaged in a vote on the floor. And my brother and sister-in-law are pretty educated people. They follow the news. They follow the politics. Fascinated fascinated by what was going on in this body and really trying to understand what it was that was going on. And I was trying to convey to them. And I realized if it's this difficult for me as a member of this body to explain to somebody that's really pretty plugged into what's going on, what is happening here, imagine the confusion of the person who just occasionally tunes in to C-SPAN, who reads the news or watches the evening news, but really isn't following the day-to-day. What we have managed to do, Madam President, is on a bipartisan basis confuse the American public, anger them, frustrate them, and cause them to be fearful about the future of our country. That's not leadership. We have an opportunity in these next very short days ahead to regain some of this. We have some ideas that are out there, as the senator from California has mentioned, and many others have mentioned. There are a great number of talks that are going on. There are talks at the leadership level. There are talks from those of us that are not part of leadership. That's important. But we need to recognize that it's absolutely critical for the future of our country, not the future of our political well-being, but the future of our country, that we be coming together to resolve the issues, not necessarily just to broker a deal, but to find a solution. Find a solution that puts the interest of our country above our own political interests. That's where we need to be, Madam President. And I am an optimist. I'm a person that has the glass always half full, and I remain committed to working with all those members who, of goodwill, will stand together to work through these difficult details. It's not easy, but they never promised us that it was going to be. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor.